Music with Pat. Last week when we got together, I talked about the colors of instruments because people had talked to me and said they didn't think that instruments could come in so many colors, that you could buy them in so many colors. And so I did a whole show on the colors of instruments. Today I want to continue with that and talk about the lacquering of instruments. The fact that when you buy an instrument today, if it's a brass or if it's a woodwind, most of the time it's really shiny, it's really bright, and you don't have to polish it to make it so. What happens and what do they do to make it so shiny and bright? And what happens when an instrument tarnishes? And can you polish a tarnished instrument? Because some instruments are made of real silver and they do tarnish and need to be polished if you want them to look shiny and bright. So this is what I'm going to be doing today. I first of all want to talk to you a little bit about how silver plating came to be. When I was a child and in elementary school, I remember that women spent a lot of time polishing their silverware, and they usually had two sets of silverware. They had one for good, when company comes, holidays and so forth, and one set of silverware for everyday use. But they spent hours and hours polishing their silverware so that it would look shiny and bright. And then I remember when it came out, the news came out that they had a way of silver plating silverware so it would be no longer necessary to polish them. They would always look good. You could just wash them and put them away, and it would be okay. They would still look good. And I thought that my mother would be pleased about this, and all of the women that I knew would be pleased about this because it would spare them hours and hours of polishing. But I discovered, much to my amazement, that they didn't like the idea. It was like a badge of distinction. If you're a true female, then the one thing you are willing to do for your guests and at holidays is to polish your silverware and spend hours doing it. And they would talk about it, how much time they spent and how good it looked. It was like a badge of distinction. And they didn't want the cheap way of doing it. The cheap way of doing it is have it already polished so you never have to do it. So I didn't quite understand that logic, but that's the way it was. Then eventually, of course, everybody started buying this silver-plated silverware so they don't have to polish it anymore. And it came into accepted use. I think still some women have, especially older women, have that second set that needs to be polished. But most of the people I know have the regular silverware that you buy that's already shiny and you never have to do anything to it except to wash it. So I wanted to show you some of these instruments, some of them shiny, some of them bright, some of them tarnished a little bit, and I wanted to describe them to you a little bit and just show you what happens in the lacquering process. This is my straight soprano saxophone. It's brilliant, it's beautiful, it's silver and gold. You'll see some of the silver keys, but the instrument itself is gold. Now that has been lacquered. A lacquer is like a special type of varnish that's used on woodwind instruments, and it's either baked on or put on with electricity so that it sticks. This instrument will never tarnish. I will never have to polish it. It will always be shining and bright. When you have an instrument like this that's been lacquered, that's what it's called. It's called lacquer, L-A-C-Q-U-E-R. The only thing that'll ever happen is if you use the instrument for years and years, you might start to get little brownish areas, a small brown spot here or there, where it has worn off just from use, but not from tarnishing. And you can make your decision as to whether you want to have it re-lacquered or not, because I believe they can do it more than once. But this is an absolutely beautiful instrument. I also brought a clarinet with me, and I just as an aside, I brought the clarinet with me because I've had people look at my straight soprano sax and call it a clarinet. As a matter of fact, let me take both of them. I had a person just a short while ago, I was carrying my soprano sax, and he said, "Isn't it nice that you brought your clarinet today?" And I said, "Well, it's not a clarinet, it's a straight soprano saxophone. It has that saxophone look. And the way to tell the difference, if you're not sure, because you don't know the difference between the different instruments, is that the clarinet will usually always be black and straight down. This is a straight down instrument. It doesn't get wider at the bottom. It just flares out a little bit at the bell. But the saxophone starts narrow on top, gets wider at the bottom, and then has a larger bell. Most saxophones are curved, just like you see in this poster. I'm just going to point at it with the clarinet. Most have that shape, that curvy shape, and most people think of saxophones as being curved. So when this man saw a saxophone that wasn't curved, he just assumed it was a clarinet, but it's not. It's a saxophone. Looks like a saxophone, plays like a saxophone. I have 3 of my flutes here. And I want to show you the lacquering and the way that they look. This is a flute that has been lacquered silver, and it's all silver, and it's shiny and bright and very nice to look at. Plays like a dream. It's a beautiful instrument. This is a flute that's been lacquered silver. And this is another flute. I want to talk a little about this flute. Do you see a difference? Let me take both of them. Do you see a difference in the color of these 2 flutes? Both lacquered, both silver. But this one here is a darker shade of silver. And sometimes on a television screen or on a camera, or if the light hits it just right, it will look like it's dark and look like it's black sometimes. And so I used to do a lot of teaching with this particular flute, and I love this particular flute. I did a lot of work with it, and I would have people come up to me and say, "Where did you get your little black flute?" And I didn't know what they were talking about. And people would say, "Gee, that's nice. I didn't know you could get black flutes." And I would think about it and say, where would they ever get the idea that this was black? But if you do a comparison, it does look darker. And then I started looking at pictures of flutes, of my flutes. And when I was playing with this one, or when someone was using a camera and they took a picture of it, when it came out dark. It came out like it was black. It actually is lacquered, but it is lacquered a darker shade. And so therefore, when the light is right, it will look dark. I don't know how it's coming out on the camera here because I can't see. But in many places, it'll come out as black or dark. Now take a look at this one here. This is real silver, and it's tarnished, and I've let it stay that way for a purpose. If you look at the back, you can see it looks real gray. This is tarnished. This is not rust. Rust is an oxidation process where rust can eat through anything and make a hole in something. But you don't get that with tarnish. It darkens things, but it doesn't make things holy. It doesn't make things so that you lose something from it. This is a real silver flute. It's a very nice flute. It will have its shiny spots where you rub your hands up against it, like when you finger it, your hands are going to be rubbing up against the keys, and those parts will be shiny, but the rest of it, or where it's laying in its case, or where you have your thumb rubbing up against it, it will be shiny there, but the rest of it, it will tarnish, and it will be gray. The mouthpiece is shinier, and that's because my mouth is on it when I'm playing it and rubbing up against it, and it's kind of the rubbing motion that keeps it clear. Now, I can polish this. I can use a silver polish and make it shiny and bright. And I don't do it because in order to really polish an instrument, especially a woodwind, it's not so hard on the brass, but on the woodwinds, you have to strip everything off. You have to take all the rods off. And when the rods are off, there's little metal pieces that go in through it, so that when you play put one key down, another key will operate. So, and you have to have those keys. So you can bend it, you can break it. It's just so much way that you can damage it that I've decided just to let it be tarnished. Now, tarnishing is not going to hurt the way it plays. If anything, it indicates that it's real silver. It's a very, very fine instrument and plays very well, and it's dark. So what is tarnish anyway? Tarnish is something that's called silver sulfate. If you look at the definitions here, silver sulfide. It's when a molecule of silver combines with a molecule of sulfur, it makes it dark. And that's what tarnish is. As I said, it's not rust. The lacquering that's used in instruments today, they don't have any of the keys on it when they're building the instrument. When it gets to the point where they've got the holes where the keys are going to be and so forth, they just do the lacquering then, and then every piece that goes on is lacquered separately and attached. The lacquer is used to coat woodwinds and brass. It keeps the shiny color. You can get it in silver, gold, or copper. If you have real silver, it is going to tarnish, and the only way to get that shiny again is to start polishing it. But that tarnish is a combination of the silver and sulfur. Where would you get sulfur? I mean, the silver is on the instrument, but sulfur is in the air. And if you're living in a city and there's a lot of gas stoves being used or industrial areas where they're using a lot of gas, you'll get a lot of sulfur. In fact, there's sulfur in eggs. So if you eat an egg, a soft-boiled egg, and you do it with silver that needs to be polished, just eating an egg will be enough to tarnish it. So then you'd have to polish it again. So you use a lacquer and it takes care of the tarnish. Let me show you another instrument here. This is my carriage horn. I hope you can see this clearly. I have polished the bell. Any instrument where it flares out, that part of the instrument that flares out is called the bell. Many woodwinds and brass have bells, but not all do. I polished the bell, but I never polished this area up here. I never polished the area on top. I polished part of the gold. I used a brass cleaner to do it. So part of this has been polished and part of it has not been. When you look up here, you can see how dark it is. That's all tarnish. If I were to use this to demonstrate it, other than in a show like this where I want the tarnish to show, I could just polish up the whole thing, and I many times have. And it comes out very bright and very clear. The bell here will be clearer than anything that's above it, because I have polished just that part. Why polish when you can have lacquer put on? Well, if you want an instrument that's real silver, has real silver in it, you're going to have to end up by polishing it if you want it shiny and bright, because the real silver will combine with the sulfur and then you'll get the tarnishing, but you won't get it in an instrument that's lacquered. Most of the instruments that come out today have already been lacquered. You will never have to polish them at all. But some of the more expensive instruments have not been lacquered, and you will have to polish them. My father played the sousaphone, and he was brilliant. He was a brilliant musician, studied at the New England Conservatory of Music. And a sousaphone, I tried to find a picture of it, but I couldn't find a good picture of it. They're huge, huge instruments. They have a bell that faces front. You see them in parades a lot, at football games, marching bands, and so forth. And then there's a big circle, and you put your head in the circle, and it drapes over your shoulder, and you have your keys. There are 3 keys on one side, and the mouthpiece comes up to your mouth. Very heavy, very large. He had a gold one, and he had to, every few weeks, polish it. So he would take a blanket and he would sit down on the floor, and he used a product called Noxon, which you could polish brass and so forth with it. I tried to find it in the stores. I could not find it in the stores. So he's polishing his instrument. It takes him hours to do it. He takes the whole instrument apart. All the valves, everything, go off the instrument, and he polishes every single part. And then after he's got it all polished, he wipes it down. And it's really shiny, and it's very bright, and it's very beautiful. He puts it all back together. He knows how to do that, and it's looking beautiful for him to play again. But in another 3 or 4 weeks, it started to tarnish. So out comes the blanket on the floor, and he goes through the process again. He did not have a lacquered instrument. Today, you can get instruments in plastics, and some of those sousaphones that you see on the field are white colored. They're all plastic, no shining there. You would never have anything lacquered that was wood. Wood comes with its own finish, and they stain the wood with some kind of a product that will give it a gloss, also protect the wood, and sometimes add color. That's basically what furniture polish does. But if you get a violin or a guitar or a wooden instrument like that, it comes with its own glow. If you get a clarinet, like my clarinet, this clarinet is made out of wood. It's very, very high-class instruments. The best instruments are made out of wood. This was soaked in oil for many, many months before they ever cut a hole in it. The wooden instruments are the finest instruments when it comes to clarinets and other instruments that you have that are made out of wood. You do not lacquer anything. It has its own finish. You don't have to lacquer anything. You would never put lacquer on a plastic because it comes pretty much already finished, so you wouldn't even have to think about that. Here's a wooden recorder, and it has a finish on it. You know that it's wood, you can see that it's wood, but it's also finished. It's smooth and it's bright, it has a luster on it. It comes like that. You'd never have it lacquered. Lacquering is done for brass instruments only, not wood and not plastic. And as I said before, it makes it shiny and bright. You never have to polish it. It has nothing to do with how the instrument is played or what it sounds like. A tarnished instrument is just as good as a regular instrument. I have a rare saxophone. It's called a C Melody tenor. It has not been made for years. I haven't had it here, but I haven't had it at church either. It's in my apartment. And when I got it, it looked orange because it was brass, and no one had lacquered it, no one had polished it, and it was so old that most saxophonists wouldn't even recognize it. These saxophones were made so long ago that most people have never seen it. Most saxophonists have never seen it. But when I got it, it was just brass and kind of orangey, and a pastor said, "Pat, you just got that instrument. Why don't you play a solo on it tonight?" Which I did. And when he looked at it, he says, "Pat, this looks like it's been through World War III. Very, very old and not very well taken care of." But a friend of mine who wanted to give me a gift took the instrument, sent it away. It was put in an acid bath. All of the parts were removed from it, and it had an acid bath, and after they cleaned it all up and they were in the process of completely rebuilding it, they put a gold lacquer on it. So when I got it back, and I got it back also with a new case, it was shiny and bright and beautiful, and I told my mother I'd have to wear sunglasses to play it because it's so bright. I will at some point bring it in so that you can see it. I'd like to bring in more at a time, but they're just too heavy to do so. So you have wood you do not lacquer. You have, and this would go also for something that's been pre-painted, like this Peruvian flute with its designs. I've had this in before. No painting, no lacquering. This has been all hand done. So nothing on the wood, nothing on the plastics, like this. That has kind of a finish to it. It came like that. You wouldn't need to have anything done to that. Nothing on some of these smaller instruments. For example, this is metal. but it's been already plated silver. It's been already plated. This is metal. It's a penny whistle, already plated gold. So you wouldn't do anything with that. That'll never tarnish. I mean, that's been gold since I've got it. I've had it for years. Nothing on plastics at all. This is made to look like wood. It's not wood, but it's plastic. They can color plastic any color. Clarinets usually come in black. Mine are all black. I have several of them, but and some of them are plastic, and this one happens to be made out of wood. But you can, you can get them in colors. One company I know has advertised clarinets in different colors, pink, red, green, because they're doing it in plastic. They can color it any way they want. And that was also one of my reasons for doing last week's show, to show how things are colored. So this is lacquer. It gets rid of tarnish. Tarnish is not rust. Tarnish will not hurt an instrument. It will make it look old. However, it'll play just as beautifully with the tarnish as without, and you just have to kind of decide how shiny and bright you want your instrument to be. Most likely, if you buy a new one, it will be all lacquered, and you will never have to touch it to make it look good, and it'll always look good. The only thing that'll happen is those little brown spots that I mentioned before, and you may want to get it re-lacquered, but you don't have to. It'll play just as well if you don't. So I think this basically takes care of what I want to show you today. If we want to look at some definitions here, silver plating is to cover something with silver through electrical means, and they do that, silver plating, a lot for silverware. And you have stain that's used to cover wood and protects wood and gives it a nice gloss, and sometimes color too. And the varnish is a liquid of anything that's anti-varnish is a liquid made of plant resins, and they use that on wood. And then, of course, you have your lacquer, and I explained what tarnish is. So if you're out to buy an instrument and you want to know, you want something that's really brilliant, buy something that already has lacquer on it. Don't buy something that you're going to have to polish, because polishing is a pain. It takes all kinds of time. You have to pull the parts off to do so. Then you have to put the parts together right. And most people don't do that well. It takes a technician who knows an instrument and how it's made to be able to do that okay. So get one that is already lacquered, and you won't have any trouble with that, and it will always look beautiful. And you can get very expensive instruments that are lacquered as well as less expensive ones. So it's a matter of personal choice. I play all of these flutes. I love all of these flutes. Doesn't matter to me whether they're tarnished or not. They are what they are. They came the way that they came, and that's the way I've always kept them. So I think that's probably enough for today. And next time I'm going to go into sanitizing instruments. If you're teaching children, how do you get them, or how do you get instruments to be disinfected so it's safe for various groups of children, if you're in a classroom situation, to play those instruments all day long? One class after another class after another class. As a lady asked me that question, and we'll be talking about that next time. Please join me again.